They used to laugh at him in quiet ways during World War II because in their squadron speed was everything and hesitation meant death, yet he flew differently. He watched more than he spoke and calculated instead of reacting. His fellow pilots believed aggression kept you alive, but he believed predictability got you killed. During a winter mission deep inside enemy airspace, the formation entered hostile skies where searchlights tore through clouds and flak burst like black fire across the night. The radio filled with panic as enemy fighters closed and engines roared and pilots pushed throttles forward believing speed would save them. He did the opposite. He eased the throttle back just enough to break expectation. An enemy fighter locked onto him fast, confident and certain of the kill, but misjudged the distance and overshot in a flash of metal. That single mistake was enough. He rolled his aircraft upward, aligned his guns and fired once. The enemy vanished into flames. Moments later another fighter dove from above expecting pursuit but met patience. Instead he slowed again, forcing the attacker to rush past, then climbed sharply into cloud cover. When the enemy followed blindly, he dropped beneath the mist, turned hard and struck from above. By the time the sky went quiet, 3 enemy aircraft were gone and his plane carried no damage. Back at base the laughter had disappeared. Pilots listened carefully as he explained that speed was easy to predict and fear made pilots repeat the same mistakes. The enemy trained to hunt movement, not restraint. That night the squadron learned survival was not always about being faster than death but about being smarter than expectation. He never called himself a hero, he simply trusted discipline over instinct and returned alive while others learned too late that courage without control was just another way to fall from the sky. They thought the damaged plane would never make it home during World War II because everyone knew the rule that a crippled aircraft was already dead in the sky, but the pilot inside that cockpit refused to accept rules written by fear. The mission had gone wrong from the start. Flak tore through the formation like iron rain and one explosion ripped through his wing, destroying instruments and cutting power to half. The engine smoke filled the cockpit and the aircraft began to lose altitude fast. The crew waited for the order to bail out because that was what pilots were trained to do when control was lost, but the pilot stayed calm. He reduced power instead of forcing it, knowing that pushing a wounded engine only finished it off. Enemy fighters circled at a distance, confident that gravity would do their work for them, but gravity works slowly when patience is involved. The pilot trimmed the aircraft carefully, balancing weight, drag and damaged lift. Every movement was small, every correction deliberate. He used clouds not to hide but to confuse, slipping in and out, changing altitude by a few meters at a time, forcing enemy fighters to constantly recalculate their attack runs. Fuel leak. Time disappeared and the radio went silent. One by one the enemy fighters gave up, believing the aircraft would crash on its own. Hours later the horizon finally appeared, friendly territory, just a thin line between survival and failure. Landing was the final gamble. Landing gear was jammed and speed had to be perfect. Too fast and the plane would break apart. Too slow and it would stall meters above the ground. The pilot brought the aircraft in gently, letting it settle onto the runway in a shower of sparks. When the plane stopped the crew sat in silence, not because they were afraid but because they understood what had just happened. Back at base officers called it impossible, mechanics called it luck, but the pilot called it restraint. He explained that panic makes pilots fight broken machines instead of working with them. Damaged planes do not need courage, they need understanding. That day a lesson spread quietly through the squadron. Sometimes survival is not about forcing strength but about respecting limits and refusing to rush toward the ending everyone else expects. The rookie pilot barely had time to breathe as he climbed into the cockpit during World War II, his first combat mission, and already the sky was alive with enemy aircraft. Tracer fire streaked across the clouds like angry lightning and explosions shook the air around him. Older pilots barked instructions over the radio, telling him to stay in formation, to follow speed, to trust instinct, but instinct screamed faster, 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 and the rookie froze. Instead he remembered the training, he remembered the diagrams and the calculations he had studied for months, and he made a choice. He slowed his plane deliberately, letting the formation pull ahead. He adjusted throttle in tiny increments, rolling slightly to the left then the right, keeping the enemy guessing. Every fighter that came near miscalculated his moves, overshot or dove too soon or fired too late. He used the sun glare to hide his approach and clouds to change altitude without being noticed. One German ace charged thinking he had an easy target. The rookie waited until the last moment then dived from above, firing accurately. In one burst the enemy aircraft spiraled down and vanished into smoke and debris. By the time the mission ended the squadron returned battered and tired, but the rookie pilot was intact. His plane had minor damage, his crew was shaken but alive. Officers debriefed the pilots asking how one inexperienced pilot had survived unscathed, and he simply said patience and calculation and observation. The squadron learned That day that courage alone is not enough to survive war, that awareness, timing and restraint often outweigh raw aggression. The rookie earned respect silently without a word, proving that even a newcomer can outsmart experience when he trusts his mind over reflexes in the chaos of the skies. The veteran pilot had seen hundreds of missions during World War II, yet nothing could prepare him for the storm that greeted his squadron that morning. Dark clouds rolled across the horizon, lightning like flak ripped through the sky, and enemy fighters surged from every direction. His comrades reacted instinctively, diving and accelerating in panic, but he remained calm. He analyzed the situation in seconds, noticing gaps in the enemy formation and patterns in their attack. He adjusted his throttle, carefully maintaining just enough speed to stay out of the most dangerous lines of fire while conserving fuel and engine strength. One enemy fighter lunged toward him, expecting an easy kill. He feigned a maneuver to the right, then rolled sharply to the left, forcing the attacker to overshoot and expose itself to another wingman. Explosions erupted around them, but he stayed focused, timing each movement precisely, knowing that a single error could be fatal. When another squadron member was hit, he took the lead and guided the remaining aircraft through the chaos, using clouds for cover and alternating altitudes to confuse the enemy. By the time they returned to base, exhausted and damaged, few words were spoken. The pilot simply nodded at him, silently acknowledging his skill and composure. The veteran explained later that it was not luck but understanding that made the difference. Reading the sky, interpreting the enemy and trusting training over instinct could save lives more than raw speed or aggressive maneuvers. That day the squadron learned the lesson that experience combined with patience often triumphs over chaos, and even the most seasoned pilots must respect timing and observation above all else. The young cadet had always dreamed of flying, but nothing in training could prepare him for the intensity of real combat during World War II. His first mission took him over enemy territory where the sky was filled with chasing fighters and tracer fire streaked across the clouds like fiery veins. The formation surged forward instinctively, but the cadet hesitated, not out of fear but calculation. He adjusted his throttle slightly, rolling his aircraft in subtle movements, using the clouds to obscure his position and the sun to blind approaching enemies. One enemy fighter targeted him aggressively, expecting a rookie mistake, yet every move he made was deliberate, forcing the attacker to overshoot repeatedly. He fired in short, controlled bursts, each shot precise and measured. His squadron mates were amazed as they saw the young pilot survive encounters that could have easily ended in disaster. His plane sustained minor damage, but his awareness and patience kept him alive. After landing, the officers debriefed the squadron, asking how a cadet with so little experience had managed to avoid losses. He simply replied, observation and restraint. The lesson spread quickly through the pilots that day. Courage without discipline is reckless, and timing can outweigh even skill. The cadet earned respect silently, proving that intelligence and calculated patience in the air often outweigh raw aggression and instinct. In the chaos of war, the skies favor those who remain calm and deliberate even when everyone else panics. The crippled bomber limped through the gray skies of World War II, smoke trailing from one engine, alarms blaring inside the cockpit. The crew braced for impact, believing the plane was doomed, yet the pilot remained calm. He analyzed the damage quickly, assessing throttle response, lift and drag, knowing that panic would only worsen the situation. He adjusted controls in small, precise increments, keeping the aircraft stable while enemy fighters circled, waiting for an easy kill. The bomber shuddered from flak explosions and tracer fire, yet he used clouds and slight altitude changes to confuse the attackers. One fighter dove aggressively only to misjudge his movement and overshoot, giving the pilot an opportunity to escape. Another enemy plane followed blindly into a mist bank, allowing him to slip out unnoticed. By the time they reached friendly territory, the aircraft was battered but intact. The landing was tense. The pilot brought the plane down gently onto the runway. Sparks flew from the damaged landing gear and the crew exhaled in relief. The squadron realized that survival in combat is rarely about raw courage alone. Patience, observation and careful calculation can outmatch instinct and aggression. The pilot's calm under pressure had saved every life on board, proving that in war understanding the machine and respecting limits can be just as critical as fighting skill or bravery. The fighter ace had faced countless battles during World War II, but nothing tested him like the morning raid over enemy territory. The sky was a chaotic dance of tracer fire and exploding flak. Pilots screamed orders over the radio, each maneuver faster and more desperate than the last, yet he remained calm. He watched patterns in the enemy approach, calculating speed, trajectory and altitude. One squadron of Messerschmitts tried to trap him, expecting aggressive, evasive action. Instead he slowed slightly letting the enemy overshoot, then rolled sharply behind a cloud bank, repositioning for a clean shot. Another fighter dove recklessly toward him but misjudged the distance and fell into the range of his wingman. Each movement he made was deliberate. Precise timing was everything. Even the youngest pilots in the squadron could see his skill unfold in real time. As the fight progressed, he used shadows and sunlight to obscure his location, forcing multiple enemy aircraft to make fatal errors. By the time the mission ended, several enemy planes had been downed, and he returned unscathed. The squadron debriefed in awe, realizing that raw speed or brute courage alone could not account for such success. Instead, observation, patience, and understanding of the enemy's psychology had turned what could have been disaster into victory. That day the ace proved that mastery in the air is as much about thinking ahead as it is about reacting quickly, and that calm under pressure can save more lives than reckless bravery. The young pilot climbed into his cockpit during World War II with a mixture of fear and determination. The sky above was thick with clouds and enemy fighters prowled like predators, searching for any mistake. His squadron surged forward instinctively, but he hesitated not from doubt but calculation. He eased back on the throttle, allowing the formation to pull ahead just enough to break predictable patterns. Every movement was deliberate, rolling slightly to the left then right, adjusting altitude in tiny increments, using clouds and sun glare to obscure his position. One German fighter dove aggressively, expecting an easy kill, yet the pilot remained calm, forcing the attacker to overshoot and exposing it to another wingman. He fired in short, precise bursts. The enemy aircraft spiraled into smoke and debris. By the time the mission ended, the squadron returned battered and shaken, but the young pilot remained intact. His aircraft had minor damage and the crew survived unscathed. During the debrief, officers asked how someone so inexperienced had survived unscathed. He replied, patience, observation, and calculated timing. The squadron realized that courage without discipline can be fatal, and that awareness and restraint in the chaos of the skies often outweigh raw aggression. The young pilot earned quiet respect, proving that even newcomers can outsmart experience when they trust their mind over reflexes, and timing can turn potential disaster into survival. The lone reconnaissance pilot flew over enemy territory during World War II, his mission critical and the risk extreme. The sky was filled with flak bursts and enemy fighters circling like hawks. Every instinct screamed to dive and accelerate, yet he stayed calm, analyzing speed, altitude, and enemy positions. Minute by minute he adjusted throttle carefully, using small, precise movements to maintain control and avoid predictability. One fighter lunged aggressively, expecting panic, but the pilot used subtle rolls and cloud cover to force it to overshoot. Another enemy aircraft miscalculated his distance and exposed itself to his squadron mates. His decisions were deliberate, calculated, and patient, relying on observation rather than brute speed or aggression. As the mission progressed, he led his aircraft through a gauntlet of danger with minimal damage and all crew members alive. When they returned to base, officers asked how he had survived the seemingly impossible. The pilot replied, restraint, timing, and awareness. The squadron learned that day that survival in war depends not just on courage but on understanding the battlefield and anticipating the enemy. Every movement and decision can mean the difference between life and death, and that a calm mind often outperforms raw instinct in the chaos of aerial combat. The final mission of the squadron during World War II was one they would never forget. The sky above churned with dark clouds and enemy fighters swarmed from all directions. Pilots screamed over the radio, diving and accelerating frantically, yet one pilot remained calm. He analyzed patterns of enemy movement, calculating speed, altitude, and timing with precision. He adjusted throttle slightly, rolling and climbing in subtle increments to avoid predictability. Every action deliberate, every maneuver measured. One enemy fighter dove aggressively, expecting a panic reaction, but misjudged the pilot's control and overshot, allowing him to strike another aircraft with a precise burst. Another enemy plane followed blindly into cloud cover, exposing itself to Allied gunners. The pilot guided his squadron through the chaos, using observation and restraint rather than raw aggression. By the time the battle ended, several enemy planes were downed, and his aircraft returned with minimal damage. The squadron understood that day that courage alone cannot guarantee survival in the air. Patience, awareness, and strategic timing often outweigh reckless speed. The pilot had turned potential disaster into triumph, proving that calm decision-making under pressure can save lives and change the course of a mission in the deadly skies of World War II.